Hello and welcome to another JBH Missing Link webinar. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Jane. I'm the founder or co-founder of JBH, the digital PR agency, and also the host of the Missing Link webinar series. So the aim of the Missing Link webinar series is just to kind of share industry thought leadership and obviously get guests on like Iona who can share kind of their experiences and provide some tips too. So I feel like this one is particularly relevant because of what's going on right now and the challenges we as an industry face. So I'm delighted to have Iona Townsley with me today, and she's going to be talking about how to smash digital PR campaigns for travel clients in the current climate. So I'm just going to hand over to Iona just to tell you a bit about her experience and background and kind of what she's up to now.
Hi, so I'm Iona. I'm a campaign strategist at Rise at 7. I work on some of their largest accounts and we deliver basically PR campaigns that bring up more than just links. So this could be anything from social shares, video views, revenue, traffic, all the good stuff. So previously I worked for a company called SEO Travel, which specialized in digital PR and SEO for travel companies. And that's where I started my PR career. And then prior to that, I worked in a range of different marketing roles from e-commerce and social media. So I've been quite intertwined with travel for a while now.
Brilliant. Okay. So I guess the first question I should ask is kind of, why do you think you're in a position to kind of tell us all kind of what we should be doing with regards to kind of travel campaigns right now?
Yeah, so I've worked on both ends of the spectrum. At the beginning of the first lockdown, I worked for an agency that worked with small to medium-sized travel businesses. And I'd say they're a little bit more traditional and they've got a lot smaller budgets usually. And then at the beginning of the second lockdown, I now work for an agency that works with much larger travel companies and ones that already have usually an established reputation and generally larger budgets. So I've kind of got different ends of the spectrum to bring.
Do you find kind of your experience overlaps both of those and there's still kind of common ground between them, or is your approach dramatically different for kind of a well-established travel brand versus kind of a smaller one?
So it completely depends. I think for both the travel brands, even if they're larger, if they're small, they're very kind of, very precious about brands. Some of them are a bit too scared to do certain things and you kind of have to ease them into it. And then also in terms of, I say that the small to medium travel brands have a smaller budget than the larger ones, but you still kind of want to provide value for money when you're doing a PR campaign. And then on certain different kind of tactics that you use for PR campaigns, they'll work no matter if the travel brand is large or small. So they do intersect quite a lot, but I think there are some specific differences with them as well.
Great. Okay. So what are the travel journalists looking for, in your opinion, right now?
So the best way to discover what a travel journalist is looking for at the moment is probably to look at how they reacted in the last lockdown.
Okay.
So in the last lockdown, we kind of saw in the beginning, it was a shock for everyone. It came a little bit out of nowhere, like a global pandemic. It's a completely new thing for everyone. So travel journalists would kind of shut down a bit. They didn't know what to talk about. They kind of wanted to make sure they weren't talking about international travel. They weren't talking about anything like that. And the things that we saw them generally talk about, I'd say would fall into kind of SEO content style of category. So people would be Googling stuff like, what is COVID? Like, can I travel now? What kind of stuff can I do? Can I travel around the UK? Can I travel to Europe? Those kind of things. So I feel like that's what they tended to be writing about, which isn't great for PRs because obviously we kind of naturally don't really fall into the SEO style content like that. And then they'd also cover stuff like government changes and also what to do about like getting a refund. So all those things, when it first kicked off, travel companies were hit really bad because they weren't just, struggling to kind of find out what they're going to do about people's refunds, find out about how the future of their business would look, but they were also struggling to kind of get any PR content out of there because travel journalists were really kind of just a bit, not too scared, but, a bit, didn't really want to go out with that kind of like normal PR content.
Yeah.
But if you remember at the beginning, there were a couple of topics that journalists were quite interested in that had between maybe April and May, they kind of were dipping their foot back in and talking a bit more about travel. I think that's when they realized that it was going to be a long time before we'd be able to travel again, and that there was content other than just kind of SEO friendly content about government guidelines that they could put out. So stuff like this, beyond travel, like it could be lifestyle, it could be anything. There was a lot of talk about home improvements now that we were working from home. Real life stories were a really big thing, fitness at home, virtual activities, working from home as well. And travel in particular, I think, saw a need for visual stories, you know, stories that provided armchair travel, which like inspired people to go traveling in the future, even though they couldn't now. So while we couldn't, you know, hop on a plane and go to Iceland, we can still view loads of beautiful places overseas whilst we're stuck at home. These kind of stories are always very, very image heavy and always make you dream of somewhere else. So they're really good stories. If we look at the back lockdown and what worked then, things that we can now take into the new lockdown and push with. And we also saw a trend for feel-good stories. So recently we released a campaign that gave people tips on how to look after hedgehogs now that they're going into hibernation. And that one's done incredibly well. We're still pushing it. I think we released it maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. And the one thing that we keep getting journalists telling us with that one is that they love that it's a nice break, that it's a nice feel-good story. And because it wasn't, obviously we didn't know lockdown was going to happen, so we didn't time it for lockdown 2.0, but they're crying out for really like nice feel-good stories, something a bit different, not just all this negativity about COVID, about lockdown, about how we can't travel.
And the beauty of that one, I mean, I personally love that campaign because I love wildlife, and I just love the execution of it because obviously you provided video content as well. So this was kind of going to be one of my later questions, but how much of an impact do you think having that really good video content or photography with your pitch kind of helps?
So I think it completely depends on what your PR campaign is. So if you're doing a data-led story, most of the time video and you know, photography probably doesn't help the story that much. But if you've got a story that's more of like a stunt or a PR campaign about cute animals, that kind of thing, photography and video can do a massive amount for you. Like the hedgehog one in particular, because we did a video for that, we're finding that in most of the coverage that we're getting, it's mainly got the video along with it. Like that's what people want to see. It's something a bit, you know, additional, a bit fun. If we put out that PR campaign and we had no imagery and no video, it would just completely flop. Like there's no point in doing it. You need to think about the kind of added things that you can. Sorry, can you say that again?
Sorry, I think it's the cuteness factor with that.
Yeah, exactly.
It was just stunning.
We have had feedback. I've been looking on the social media, and I think Americans, they don't really have hedgehogs. Some people are saying the hedgehogs are gross, but I mean, what can you do? Poor Flowers the hedgehog.
Everybody, can you?
I know, exactly. It is a rescue hedgehog. I mean, like, leave it alone.
So, given your experience and the campaigns you've been putting out at the moment, what types of campaigns do you think people should be focusing on or what types of stories?
So, kind of what I've touched on before, definitely stories that have a lot of visual aid to them. So, if it's like a new kind of accommodation, I'd push out something like if it's a hotel in the Seychelles or something like that, and it's got you know, something a bit different, and you can provide a lot of photography and a lot of images to go along it. Definitely stuff like that. As much as everyone hates most Instagrammable campaigns, I think they do have a place in lockdown. Like I know a lot, if there's any journalists watching this, I don't know why there would be, but they'd be like, please no, don't you dare send me another Instagrammable thing. But they do have a place and they do get pickup. And the reason for that is that people are stuck inside and they want to go out and they want to travel. So the best way that they can do that, unfortunately, is to look at pretty pictures online.
Yeah.
Another one for sure as well is feel good stories. So it is a lot of doom and gloom, but a story that kind of has a nice twist to it that's a bit different, that maybe doesn't even, you know, mention COVID. Obviously, don't ignore it, but if it's something where people can escape with, that's definitely something else that's going to do really, really well.
Yeah. Obviously, kind of, you know, in this first lockdown, you know, a lot of journalists were writing about kind of getaways in 2021. Given that we're kind of very close to 2021 and there'll still be travel restrictions at the start of the new year and no one quite knows when things will return to normal, do you have any advice about kind of pitching that kind of content and whether we need to be thinking, you know, 2022 or the latter end of 2021?
So I watched a webinar, maybe must be a month ago now. It's before the second lockdown. We were told that was going to happen. It was with Cara and Caroline from the Sun, and they were basically saying that they were looking forward to 2021 already, even though we weren't in a lockdown then. They were saying like there's no point in pitching us anything to do with international travel directly at the moment. We're looking much further ahead, and then if it is UK travel, we will look for like content that's around Christmas time, but it's still a bit iffy. So I think if you've got something that is for 2021, depending on what you're pitching, you can still definitely get coverage for that. I just think you need to be careful about what your angle is. So if you've got like a new hotel that's opened up in Chile or something like that, and you think it's the best thing ever, and normally you'd get coverage for that because it's a new opening and it's somewhere interesting that people can go, but it's opening in February, and you go out with a press release saying, "Oh, new hotel opened." I don't think it's going to get that much coverage. I think what you need to do is angle it a different way, angle it towards journalists saying, look at this like new beautiful hotel, like this is the unique features it has. You need to go out with different angles. You can't just be doing it the same way that we've done it before, because they're not covering that kind of stuff anymore.
Okay. And which campaigns that you've worked on have you seen, obviously apart from the hedgehogs, what have you seen kind of do well and why?
I just want to talk more about the hedgehogs now.
I mean, I'd love to talk about hedgehogs for half an hour, but
We did one that was called the Royal Caravan, which was absolutely insane. We launched that near the end of lockdown when people could travel in the UK again. It was a UK-based caravan, and I absolutely adored that one. So that kind of kicked it, just basically like blew up the staycation market at the time. And it was like something new and interesting, and it like got our client everywhere. Everyone was talking about it. They wanted to film it. It was basically this caravan that we kitted out as Buckingham Palace. And the way that we positioned it is that it was this, you know, beautiful new caravan, and look at all these like weird things that were in it. There was like custom thrones, there were like golden dog bowls and that kind of thing. There was a flag, like an English flag going outside of it. It was absolutely insane. And then we also created a video to go along with it, which is a NTV crib style video. And we also got lookalikes. So we got Queen Elizabeth, Kate Middleton, William, and we got them all together and we filmed this video for it, and that did really, really well. Not only did it do well in the UK because it was this like new interesting place that you could stay, but it also did well in the US and Australia. I think it was their interest in the royal family that probably did it for them, rather than them being able to stay there. We did get some feedback from some people in the US saying, this is really interesting, it's a shame that we can't stay there. But because it provided so much visuals and it was a quirky accommodation and something interesting and different to do, they still covered it.
yeah, definitely. I mean, I've no idea kind of what kind of budget that might have involved, and a lot of your campaigns are very creative. Do you have any examples of campaigns that maybe aren't so creative, that are kind of smaller budget, kind of quite quick turnaround?
Yeah, so we did a staycation market report, and that was pulling on lots of trends of what was happening in lockdown. And for that one, we got loads of information and data from the client, and we put that in the report as well as finding our own data. And the really good thing about that is that it was a very kind of small budget type thing, because we weren't, you know, creating this like big dev'd piece. We didn't need like a photographer, we didn't need like all of these images. We were just using the data that was available to us, that's available to everyone, packaging it in a different way, and then also using the client's data, which is one of the best things that you can definitely do for a campaign, because no one has your client's data. It's completely unique, it's completely different. So we packaged it all together as a staycation report. And that one of the reasons that I love that one so much is because it got obviously quite a lot of, well, not obviously, I like to say it has quite a lot of coverage, but also it's very, very evergreen. Like people are still picking up stats from that and using it to this day, even though we launched it maybe 2 or 3 months ago.
Okay, that's really interesting. So it was timely, that it's still kind of got that relevance to it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So just thinking about kind of in-house teams as well, what kind of tips can you can you give to help them kind of get coverage at a time like this?
So I know for in-house teams, it's a little bit different. I feel like in-house teams might be, if you're just managing one, like your client, your house, or whatever you want to call it, then you are probably tasked with getting coverage, but also like booking is also a really heavy thing that's going to be on you. It's not just like if you're doing digital PR for an agency and the KPI might be however many links and you're just trying to get those links. If you're in-house, you're very, very close to the client, well, your company, in the sense that you really want to see bookings coming through it. So they've got different objectives, but I think that there's still lots of things that you can do. It's a little bit more difficult. It kind of depends on how far you want to like step into doing more digital PR angled, rather than saying this new hotel's been released or that kind of thing. But I think the strength that an in-house someone working in-house has is that you're really probably going to be want to do reactive stuff. So you're going to be able to turn around stats from your client, comments from your client, things straight from the client a lot quicker than any other agency is going to be able to do. So that's where you're going to have your strength. And you should really be thinking about when travel changes, when, you know, people are looking for different places to go, that kind of thing, you should be thinking about what value you can provide. So there's a tool called Trav Media, which I absolutely adore. It's the best thing ever, especially if you're in the travel business. But it's like Harrow, but for journalists, the travel industry. But basically, you'll have travel journalists and they'll put out stuff out there like, oh, we're doing a roundup and we're looking for this thing, or we're looking for stats about this particular government change. And it's a really useful way of getting stats and quotes and that kind of thing quickly out there. So I'd really, really recommend to use that. There's usually people from like the Guardian, the Express on there, the Sun. There's a really big, you know, it's very, very broad. So I'd go out with stuff like that. For example, with ski at the moment, we've seen that the first half of ski is probably, the ski season's probably going to be a little bit of a write-off, and then the second half of the ski season is still going. So the second that we kind of heard about that, if you had a ski client, I definitely would have gone out with a comment talking about what they're thinking the second season is going to look like, what their plans are for the first season, what kind of COVID regulations they're implementing to make sure that everyone's safe when they're skiing. Reactive is definitely going to be the strongest thing that you can do as an in-house PR.
Okay, so it's again, it's about providing kind of value and just providing some expert comments, maybe where you can. And on that kind of note, you know, maybe people discussing kind of what the second half of the ski season might look like, for example. How do you feel about people making predictions about when, you know, travel might lift? Would you tell people to kind of stay away from making any predictions, or what's your thought on that?
I think unless you've got something to back it up, I might stay away from predictions a little bit, just because I'd be afraid of, you know, doing a bit of, you know, too big of a, you know, prediction, just like taking it a bit too far.
Yeah.
I'd be careful with kind of any information that you're pushing out there that's related to COVID, unless it's backed up with stats or really good information. But I wouldn't go out there with like a prediction for like what's going to happen in the next 4 months, unless a journalist has like absolutely requested it. If you've seen lots of stuff about that on online publications and on the travel sections, then maybe I'd step into it, but at the moment I'll probably stay away.
Okay. On that note, and it's something we haven't discussed, so I apologize for kind of landing this question on you, but do you get involved with kind of PR teams within the travel brands? You know,
Yeah, so
positioning themselves at this time?
sorry, can you repeat that? I just talked over you.
Yeah, sorry. Do you get involved with PR teams? Do you talk to them about how they're positioning themselves at this time, and, you know, to get a feel for what they can say, what they can't say, etc.?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the clients that we work with, and I imagine a lot of other people's clients, there's certain things that they don't really want to touch on. There's certain clients that we work with where they will have like a traditional in-house PR agency. And I think as a rule, digital PR, if you're in an agency, you're much happier to kind of go out with like the fun, interesting stuff and be like, oh, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. But the PRs in the client, they're so much closer to it that I think they're a bit more worried about putting out certain information. So in terms of working with them, I think the best thing to do is obviously listen to their concerns. And if you think you should push it because it's going to be better in the long run, definitely do so. But as a general thing, I think it's been very unique, the challenges they're facing, depending on the client. So if you're a staycation provider in the UK, you're probably struggling with the tier system. Whereas if you're a international travel provider and you cover lots of different locations, they're probably struggling a lot more with the restrictions that are happening country to country. I think it's very, very unique. I don't want to go too deep into it. But obviously, I think definitely keep up that communication with them to see what they're comfortable with talking about, like how they feel about certain things, because you don't want to start a campaign and then get blindsided, I don't know, a month or two in saying, actually, we're quite uncomfortable with this kind of thing. You need to make sure that they're completely happy with it.
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, we talked about some of the hero campaigns that you've worked on. Are you doing more reactive activity at the moment just because it's kind of easier or more fitting because you don't know what the landscape's going to look like in X amount of months, etc.? Or are you still doing the same level of kind of hero campaigns?
So personally, I've been pushing hero campaigns that can be easily pivoted.
Okay.
And then for reactive, kind of, the way we work anyway is we just look for reactive opportunities as they come. So we're not gonna kind of force the reactive thing if our client doesn't fit the particular landscape at the time, if that makes sense. If no one's talking about their product, then we're not going to kind of push anything out there. We're sticking mainly to hero stuff and making sure, for example, if it's data, that's a really good way of pivoting a campaign, because you can add loads of different data points, and then when it gets time to outreach, you can pick out the certain data points that you think are going to be best for the landscape. So definitely hero campaigns at the moment.
Okay, that's interesting. And I think there's a good tip there as well about kind of continuing with what you were going to do, but also kind of adjusting elements of it so that you've also got some kind of timely data in there as well. So it's not just kind of something put together or thought about a while ago that maybe doesn't fit when it actually launches.
Yeah, I think we've all got experience of this by now as well. Like when lockdown 2.0 hit, I think the thought on everyone's mind was, right, how can we make sure these campaigns can thrive over the next couple of months, because we've done all the work for them and we're about to outreach them, but things have changed. Is there something in there that we can pull out, a new angle that'll work really well now that we're in lockdown?
Okay, brilliant. And what advice would you give to people who are managing travel clients? So obviously comms is huge right now, and with people, with brands kind of, maybe validly being kind of more concerned about what's going out and the impact of certain angles, etc. What advice have you got for anyone kind of managing those relationships?
So I think the first thing to remember is, if you are in an agency and you're managing travel clients, they are in a 10 times worse position than you are. And it's a really important thing to keep in mind, because you could be, completely just stressed all the time, like trying to find out how you're going to pivot these campaigns and stuff. But you need to basically just chill out a little bit and remember that your travel clients, their business is hanging in the balance at the moment. So you need to keep that in mind whenever you're talking to them. I think that's a really important thing.
Yeah.
I think also you should come to them with solutions and not problems. So your job as an agency is supposed to be an extension of their team. So if you have found an issue, if you think that there's a campaign that needs pivoting, I wouldn't come to them and say, I think we need to change this campaign. I think you should come to them and say, right, we're changing this campaign and we're doing this, and this is the outcome that we're expecting. Not just kind of tell them all the problems and the issues that are happening, because they have so many problems and issues that are happening, behind the scenes that you never see. You, as that person who's representing them in the agency, you need to be kind of thinking a step ahead of the things and the problems that could go wrong, and making sure that you're fixing them before they get to the client, and then saying to the client, look, I'm making your life 10 times easier. We've had this issue, but we fixed it, and now this is what we're presenting to you.
Yeah. So presenting solutions rather than kind of issues.
Yeah, definitely. And then also a big part, I think, from our end is managing expectations, because at the end of the day, we're in a lockdown. It's not great. The media landscape's completely changed. Like, journalists are losing their jobs left, right, and centre. There's a lot more advert stories and publications. It is harder to get a cut through. And then things just, flying in from the side, like a new lockdown, new restrictions, makes it 10 times harder. You need to make sure when you're talking to your client that you're managing expectations. You're saying, like, we're doing the best that we can possibly do, and that we're going to still get you links and we're still going to get you results and coverage.
Yeah.
But because of the unique way that 2020 is going on, like, we could never have expected it. There might be some hiccups in the road, but make sure you assure them that you're there to do a job and you're going to get that job done.
Okay, so it's more about kind of but it is about managing expectations, but it's also about reassuring them that you're there to do the best for them, regardless of kind of what's going on, and that you're more committed than ever. Is that fair?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's fair.
Cool. Okay. So, of the campaigns you've kind of been working on, maybe since the start of lockdown, kind of which one are you most proud of and why?
I want to say the Royal Caravan, but I've already touched on that, so I'm going to touch on a different one just to keep things interesting. We did a chocolate orange themed hotel room, which I'm absolutely obsessed with. And then ever since then, in the company, I think it's been a joke that I'm obsessed with chocolate orange. I don't think that's true, but I'm going along with it now. And for that one, we created this amazing like chocolate orange themed hotel room. It had like all sorts of bits in it. It had this like fanned thing, and the way that we did that is we pitched it to the client as like an option of something we could do, and then we created the imagery as like a mock-up of what it'd look like in the hotel room, in the actual hotel, which is a new one that's opening. And before, as we knew it would take, you know, like a really long time for it to actually like get off the ground and be something that people could actually physically visit first, we decided to go out with the story straight away.
Okay.
So we did the mock-up, and then we pushed that out to journalists, and they absolutely loved it at the time because it was something different and visual and like fun that people could look at. But I remember we got a lot of stick about it because I think people thought the image that we created was supposed to be photorealistic when it's very clearly a mock-up. So I felt a bit bad for our designer on that one.
I was going to ask you about, you know, whether that was just an internal piece that you put together, or whether you got kind of support from like an interior designer or a hotel designer.
No, so that's something that we pitched, and it's kind of completely off our own back, which is why the design might look a little bit a bit janky. I think it looks great personally, but I know it's kind of torn the internet apart a little bit on the PR side of things.
Well, I always think it's better to be talked about than not talked about at all. So
I mean, if someone can find a fault with their hedgehog, they can find a fault with anything, can't they?
exactly, you can't please everybody.
Yeah.
So, on that kind of note, is there any, before we go to kind of questions, is there kind of like a final thought or a piece of advice that you'd like to leave everybody with? If you could just tell them one thing that you've learned.
Yeah, definitely. So I think what the last lockdown has told us, and now the new lockdown is kind of reinforcing, is that you need to be adaptable for sure. That's the main thing. We're all essentially in the same boat, and the only thing that's going to set you apart from your competition, the only thing that's going to set you apart from other agencies, is how adaptable you can be and how you can make the best of a bad situation.
And what does, off the back of that, what does adaptability look like to you personally?
So personally, I think that straight off the bat, making sure that you are talking to your clients about what you're going to do if there's an issue, if there's been a country that's been taken away or added onto the travel corridor list, you're being really, really quick, and you're making sure you're telling them kind of the next steps of what you'd like to see going forward to make sure you're getting PR coverage with that, but also making sure that any future campaigns, at least for a little while, are able to be pivoted so that you can adapt to, you know, the future. We don't know what's happening.
But I mean, you touched on a good point actually, which I should have asked you about earlier, and that's about being ahead of the news. Well, not ahead of the news, but just making sure that you're following it, you know, every hour, etc. Because so much changes, especially within travel. And I think that's such an important point, because if you are having these conversations with clients, you need to know exactly what's going on. So you, not only can you keep them up to date, but in case they have questions for you, etc., on how, you know, things that are going on are going to impact campaigns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So I remember I did a Twitter thread. I'm not saying I've got that many Twitter followers. I don't know how many people replied to it. But the main issue is that people found that there were so many restrictions going on and it was so hard to keep up with it. So I think if you're concentrating, if you've got like a really concentrated PR strategy in the sense that you are kind of, you're like, okay, the Maldives is now open, so we're going to do some work on that. You still need to make sure you've got different angles and you can pivot your campaigns because it can just get shut down within a week. Like we've seen with so many different countries how they're just on and off again. Like it's impossible to book a holiday at this point.
Yeah. And sorry, I keep asking you X questions, but with obviously with new places opening up with the travel corridor, etc., how quickly do you have to get kind of pitches out that kind of reflect those changes?
So in terms of reactive stuff,
Yeah.
instantly, as quick as you physically possibly can. I think if you're doing reactive work and you're looking at what's in the news and you're trying to respond to it, you need to, I'm not even going to say how quick you should be, because you should be quicker. You need to be as physically
Not
possible.
quick enough.
You need to be the first one, because if the Maldives is, on the cards again, everyone who's selling holidays to Maldives is going to be jumping on that. Everyone who's doing travel insurance is jumping on that. Airlines are jumping on that. You need to be quicker than the biggest travel agency in the world. I don't know what it'd be, but you need to be quicker, basically.
So this is a really testing time for anybody that works in travel, especially if you're in PR, because obviously there's so much pressure. So yeah, I really appreciate you obviously sharing this insight. We've got a couple of questions. So the first one is from Rebecca, and she says, do you have any techniques to help the traditional PR teams for travel brands feel more comfortable with a more creative and reactive approach?
I think the best way is to prove to them that it can work. So if you've seen something happening in the past, like if you want to create like a brand new product that someone can stay in, you can show them stuff like the Royal Caravan and the chocolate orange hotel room, and say to them, look, like we've seen it work in the press, it's got really good pickup. Like a lot of stuff hasn't got pickup at the moment, so showing them the proof is definitely the best way for them to agree to like more creative things. You also need to reassure them as well, because I think a lot of traditional PR companies are a bit too scared to kind of go out there a little bit. You need to hold the hand with them a little bit, I think, definitely.
Yeah. And I've got a question from Eva. She says, do you find reactive approaches gain more coverage given the pandemic?
So I think they definitely gain more, if you're thinking of reactive in terms of now in travel compared to maybe last year in travel, I think they definitely get a lot more more coverage at the moment compared with last time. But you do also have that thing where you're up against lots of competition for reactive stuff. Like everyone's putting out a comment, so it depending on what it is, it can definitely get a lot more coverage, but it depends what it is, I think.
And I guess that's why hero campaigns are still important, in that
Yeah,
in order to get more visibility and to do something a bit different, that's when the more creative campaigns come in.
Yeah, if you've planned your hero campaign and you know there's different angles and you can pivot it, I think it's definitely the safer way to go. I would not rely on doing reactive. Reactive's like a nice thing to add on top of a PR strategy, but not something to rely on, definitely, especially in the way travel is at the moment. I wouldn't do it.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Let's see if we've got any more questions. Yeah, so Alex says, what's an example of a travel PR fail that you've seen and why? That's a nice question.
I think I'm thinking about it in links, and I'm thinking that if I saw a travel PR fail, I wouldn't have seen it go anywhere, so I probably wouldn't have seen it. There's definitely things that have happened. I can't think off the top of my head. There's definitely things that happen that I've looked at and I've been like, God, why have you done that? Like, that's ridiculous. But I don't think I retain that memory, to be honest. I think I'm just like, right, get rid of it. I'm not talking about this.
You haven't seen any kind of travel PR where you just think that's just tone deaf, that's just, without mentioning obviously any brands, etc.
There's definitely some. I honestly can't think of any. If I can, I'll send it on Twitter, but at the moment, I'm not.
Cool. And one of the questions I had actually that I didn't ask earlier was, obviously you mentioned one of the tools, a hero request for travel. Have you got any other kind of go-to tools or podcasts or anything that you kind of rely on for your day-to-day information?
So I don't really rely on it, but in terms of finding good webinars, Roxhall's amazing because they have webinars maybe every 2 weeks or so, and they're usually super relevant and with really high up like editors in large publications. So they've got one tomorrow. I don't know if you have to be a part of Roxhall to actually join it, but it's about.
We're part of Roxhill, so I don't know. I see them, but I don't know whether you can. I presume you can join anyway, whether you're a member or not.
Yeah, I'm not too sure. I know some places you have to donate some money to charity and they'll let you watch it, but I'm not sure how they do it. But they've got a ski webinar tomorrow, which will be extremely useful because obviously ski's a bit of a weird one at the moment. So I would definitely recommend the webinars from Roxhall. You can probably just go and follow them on Twitter, to be honest, and just see what they've got out there.
And any specific kind of travel publications that you rely on or that you always read?
Well, I absolutely love Lonely Planet. I think it's changed a little bit since the last lockdown. I think they've had an internal chat about the kind of stuff that they want to put out. I feel like it was a lot more PR friendly, and now they're more reliant on, you know, activities and like places that you can go. But I still love it. Also love Travel and Leisure, classic. And then I always go on the Sun every morning and check the travel section because that's the best way to see the kind of stuff that they're covering at the moment. If you go on it now, there was a Toy Story house or hotel or something, which was really interesting. And you can see why it's on there because it's getting tons of traffic. So I definitely look at the Sun every morning and to see what's going on.
Perfect. Okay, well, that's some excellent advice there, some great references. So unless we've got any other questions, I think that's a wrap. So really appreciate your time this lunchtime, Iona. Some really great insight and tips that I know myself and the team will take away too. So really appreciate you joining us. Also, if you're interested in our other webinars, we've got a couple coming up. We've got how to harness newsjacking for digital PR with Rebecca Moss from JBH, and that's in December. And then early January, I think it's January the 12th, we've got Thierry from Rise at 7, and he's going to be talking about data fails. So if you go on our website, you'll be able to see all of our webinars coming up on there. So thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you for your questions and your comments. Really appreciate it. And we will see you very soon. Thanks, Iona.
Bye. Bye.